J.D. Vance shattered the hollow silence of the Senate chamber by cornering Barack Obama, slamming a damning dossier onto the mahogany table to expose the $1.7 billion cash transfer to Tehran. Did it feel heavy, Mr. President? The weight of $1.7 billion in green cash as it left American soil for a regime that wants us dead? The folder slapped against the mahogany table with the sound of a closing casket, echoing through the hollow silence of the Senate chamber. J.D. Vance didn't blink, his eyes boring into the man sitting across from him with a predatory, cold stillness. The greatest paradox of modern America doesn't lie in the enemies hiding in the shadows of the Middle East, Vance declared. It lies in the one standing under the brightest lights, behind the most prestigious podiums, draped in the flag while he quietly empties the vaults. We are told that peace is found through a nuanced surrender, Vance continued, while the very people lecturing us on morality are the ones packing suitcases with our children's future. They preach about the soul of America before the cameras, then turn around and deliver that soul on a silver platter to the highest bidder in Tehran. The man who saves a reflecting pool for $2 million is branded a threat, while the man who hands billions to terrorists is hailed as a visionary. Welcome to the heart of the deep state, where the air is thick with the smell of old money and fresh treason. $1.7 billion, hand delivered on a silver platter. J.D. Vance leaned forward, the distance between him and the former president shrinking until there was nowhere left for the lies to hide. I want to know if it was satchels or suitcases, Barack, he pressed. I want to know what a betrayal of that magnitude looks like when it's packed for travel. Barack Obama adjusted his cuffs with a terrifyingly calm grace, a faint, practiced smile flickering across his face. It was the smile of a man who believes he has already won the argument before it started. Vance, your penchant for the dramatic is well documented, but the world is a complex place, far beyond the shocking headlines you prefer for your digital followers. He leaned back, exuding the academic arrogance of a professor who viewed the American taxpayer as a bank account for his globalist experiments. That transfer was a settlement of long-standing claims, a necessary lubricant for the machinery of international diplomacy to prevent a nuclear catastrophe. Machinery of diplomacy, is that what we were calling it now? Proper laugh that held no humor, only the cold edge of a serrated blade. You emptied out every bank in D.C., Virginia, and Maryland to fill those planes, he stated. You didn't just pay a bill. You gave a powerful new lease on life to a regime that has been playing games with this country for 47 years. Delay. That was their strategy, and you were the one who finally hit pay dirt for them. Obama's eyes narrowed, the mask of Ivy League composure cracking just enough to reveal a flash of genuine irritation. We secured an agreement that made the world safer, Obama argued. A feat of leadership that required a level of sophistication that your America First rhetoric simply cannot grasp. Safer? Tell that to the families of the soldiers who face the roadside bombs your green cash funded, Vance shot back. Vance stood up, his presence towering over the witness table as if he were carrying the weight of every forgotten worker in the interior of the United States. It doesn't take sophistication to be a sucker. It takes arrogance, he declared. You found the greatest sucker of them all in the form of a weak leader, and the Iranians couldn't believe their luck when they saw those planes landing. They took that money off the plane, and they laughed at our now great again country. Obama tilted his head, his tone shifting to a patronizing whisper, the voice of a man who had architected wrong his entire presidency and was doing it still. History will remember that moment as a turning point toward engagement, not the crude caricature you are painting for the cameras today. Oh, history will remember it all right, Vance retorted. It will remember the snake who knowingly did wrong while lecturing the rest of us on righteousness. Vance picked up a single document from the file. Report on the 42,000 innocent, unarmed protesters recently wiped out by that same regime, he read. 47 years they've been killing our people, and you flew them suitcases of cash like you were their personal concierge. The betrayal is over, Barack. We aren't rubber stamping exceptions for foreign thugs anymore while American workers get shafted. The silence that followed was heavy, the air in the room suddenly too thin for the nuance Obama was trying to sell. You didn't bring peace, Vance asserted. You brought a lease on life for evil, and you did it with every red blood cell coursing through the veins of the American taxpayer. Vance slammed his hand onto the table, the sound echoing like a gavel. Now tell this committee, was the diplomacy worth the blood on those suitcases? The silence in the chamber was a physical weight, thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the cold ozone of high-definition cameras. J.D. Vance didn't just look at the man across from him, he dissected him with a gaze that had seen the rot in the interior of the country and survived it. Barack Obama remained perfectly still, his chin tilted just high enough to look down his nose at the proceedings. 47 years? Mr. President Vance spoke softly, but the words carried the force of a hammer hitting an anvil. 47 years, that the regime in Tehran has been playing games with the United States and the rest of the world. Vance picked up a single sheet of paper, the edges crisp and white against his tanned fingers. They spent those decades tapping us along, keeping us waiting, and all the while they were killing our people with their roadside bombs. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a register that made the microphones hum with tension. And then they hit pay dirt. They hit pay dirt when you became president. A flicker of a smile, practiced and hollow, crossed Obama's face, showing the expression of a man who believed his own press releases. History is rarely as linear or as convenient as a campaign slogan, Obama stated. My administration inherited a Middle East on the brink of a firestorm, and we chose the path of sophisticated engagement. Vance let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh that contained no warmth, only a jagged edge of derision. Is that what we're recalling it now, when you jettison Israel and our other allies to give Iran a major and very powerful new lease on life? You didn't just talk to them, Barack. You handed it to them on a silver platter. He slammed his hand onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the vaulted ceiling. $1.7 billion in green cash flown directly into Tehran. Every bank in D.C., Virginia, and Maryland was emptied out just to satisfy your urge to be the greatest sucker of them all. Obama's eyes narrowed, the polished veneer of the hope and change architect beginning to show the first hairline fractures. The settlement was a legal necessity to move the global community toward a non-nuclear future, a feat of leadership that required immense courage. Courage! Vance stood up, his presence towering over the witness table like a thunderstorm rolling over the plains. It doesn't take courage to find a weak and stupid American president and take him for everything he's worth. The Iranians couldn't believe their luck. They took that money off the plane in suitcases and satchels, and they laughed at our country. They saw a leader who was a disaster for us, but a godsend for them. He leaned so close to the microphone that his breath was a low growl in the ears of every radio listener across the nation. And while they were unloading your suitcases of cash, do you know what they were doing with their other hand? They were wiping out 42,000 innocent, unarmed protesters, 42,000 souls, Mr. President. And some reports say that as a small estimate, that the real number is well into the six figures. They were killing our people and they were destroying protests, and you were their personal ATM. Obama adjusted his cuffs, his voice regaining that rhythmic, hypnotic cadence that had fooled the world for 8 years. Our foreign policy was guided by a profound sense of global responsibility, he said. We understood that the world is a diverse tapestry of nations and that we must lead with a sense of humanity and tolerance. We chose to be the bigger nation to show the developing world that America is not just a fist, but a hand reaching out in friendship. Vance went deathly quiet, a stillness that was far more terrifying than his previous shouting. Humanity? Tolerance? He repeated the words as if they were a foreign language he was struggling to translate. I love that you use those words, Barack. I'm taking those words. I'm stealing them right out of your mouth, because they are the perfect bridge to the carnage you've left behind. You speak of humanity for the thugs in Tehran who slaughter their own people while laughing at our weakness. But where is that humanity for the American worker whose factory was left behind? Where is that tolerance for the families in the interior of this country who have to watch their tax dollars be flown overseas like candy while our own supply chains are left to rot? Obama's jaw tightened, the mask finally dropping to reveal a flash of cold, elitist resentment. We were building a global architecture of cooperation, something that requires a level of sophistication that America first simply cannot grasp. Vance's smile was as sharp as a razor blade. "Oh, we grasp it all right. We grasp that you support the bad guys over there, and you support the bad guys over here. We grasp that while you were architecting wrong throughout your entire presidency, you were paving the way for the filth we see today. You call it global responsibility. I call it a 100% factual betrayal of the American taxpayer. The Iranians are laughing no longer, Mr. President, because we finally have American badassery back in the White House. We have the balls of Theodore Roosevelt back, and we aren't letting the deceptive Decepticons of the deep state play us for suckers anymore. You want to talk about humanity and tolerance? Let's bring that conversation back to the streets of America. Let's see how much humanity is left in the cities that your party has turned into a septic tank." Vance picked up a new folder, one that didn't contain photos of Tehran, but photos of the rot closer to home. The domino effect had been triggered. The blood on the streets of Iran was about to be linked directly to the filth on the streets of Los Angeles, and Barack Obama was about to find out that his academic shield of nuance was useless against the raw, grinding gears of the truth. Humanity. Vance repeated the word, letting it hang in the stale air of the chamber like a bad smell. I love that word, Barack, because it's the favorite mask of the soulless. You speak of humanity for the thugs in Tehran, but I want to talk about your version of humanity right here at home. I want to take a little trip 3,000 miles west of this ivory tower to a place called Los Angeles, a place that has been turned into a laboratory for your compassionate experiments. Obama adjusted his glasses, his face a mask of polished academic indifference. The challenges of urban governance are complex, and they require a level of empathy that your brand of politics seems to lack. Vance didn't flinch, his eyes boring into the former president with the intensity of a predator who had already scented blood. Empathy? Let's talk about the price tag of your empathy, $355 million. That is the amount of our tax dollars, the money of hardworking Americans, that has been poured into the homelessness industrial complex in Los Angeles over the last 3.5 years. $355 million. And what did the people of that city get for that staggering, obscene fortune? Did they get safe streets? Did they get clean parks? No, they got filth, they got scum, they got deranged, crazy people defecating on their sidewalks and spitting on them while they try to walk to work. You can't even walk down a city block in a blue-run city without seeing the physical manifestation of your humanity rotting in the sun. Is that your version of righteousness, Barack? Letting a once great city become a septic tank of human misery? Obama leaned into the microphone, his voice a low, rhythmic hum of controlled condescension. What you call filth, we call marginalized neighbors who have been failed by a system of systemic inequity. We believe that every human being deserves a seat at the table, and that requires diversity, equity, and inclusion. Die. The problems in Los Angeles aren't going to be solved by the American badassery of more police and more cages. They are solved by social workers, by housing, first initiatives, and by a commitment to the invisible members of our community. Your obsession with cleaning up is just a dog whistle for oppressing the vulnerable. Vance barked out a short, jagged laugh that held no humor, only the cold edge of a serrated blade. Vulnerable? The only people who are vulnerable in Los Angeles are the honest taxpayers who get attacked on their way to the grocery store. You call it inclusion, I call it a parasitic disease that is bleeding this nation dry. You would rather hire 10,000 social workers with clipboards to negotiate with a man who is literally defecating on a public monument than hire one more police officer to keep the peace. You revel in this mess because it reflects who you are inside, filthy, rotten, and soulless. You spend $355 million, and the only thing you produce is more filth. The Democrats support the bad guys, they support the terrorists in Tehran, and they support the criminals in our streets. And then you have the nerve to tell us that we are the ones who lack empathy. Is it empathetic to tell a mother she has to step over a deranged person to get her child to school? Is it empathetic to let American cities look like a garbage dump while you celebrate your sophistication in Martha's Vineyard? Obama straightened his tie, the mask of Ivy League composure finally beginning to show hairline fractures of genuine resentment. We are building a future that is recognizable to a global community, not a regressive fortress of meritocracy. Meritocracy is just another word for exclusion. and we choose to invest in the collective, no matter how messy it may seem to your aesthetic sensibilities. Our social workers are the front lines of a new America, an America that cares. Vance's smile was as sharp as a razor and twice as cold. Oh, I see your front lines very clearly, Barack. I see exactly what kind of people your party nurtures to run this circus. You want to talk about your inclusive future? Let's talk about the people you've spent decades grooming in your political labs. Let's talk about the MVP superstars that your party produces when they aren't busy flying cash to the Ayatollahs. Since you love your social workers and your DEI bureaucrats so much, I think it's time we pull back the curtain on the people running the show. The domino effect was in full motion now, the momentum shifting from the failed streets of LA to the failed characters of the deep state. Obama's mention of social workers and inclusion had provided the perfect bridge for the next indictment. Vance reached for a thick, black-bound dossier. You like to talk about harvesting talent for the future, don't you, Mr. President? Well, let's see what kind of crop you've actually grown in the Democrat swamp, because I think the American people are about to find out that your inclusion is just a fancy word for grooming corrupt operatives. J.D. Vance leaned back, a cold, predatory smile spreading across his face as he tapped the black-bound dossier on the mahogany table. You talk about sophistication and global architecture, Barack, but let's look at the actual bricks you've used to build this crumbling edifice. You mentioned your social workers and your inclusive vision, but I call it what it really is. DEI is an imperceptible, impalpable contagion, the worst parasitic disease that has ever afflicted modern society. It is an invisible virus that has bled into every artery of our nation and caused nothing but chaos. And you don't just export it through policy. You grow it in a lab, don't you? I want to talk about the byproduct of your nurturing. I want to talk about Eric Swalwell. Vance flipped the first page of the file, his eyes never leaving Obama's polished, static face. This repulsive, spineless, worthless operative is the direct byproduct of Democrat grooming and facilitating. He was a nobody who came out of nowhere, but he was molded and crafted by people like you and Nancy Pelosi. You literally grew him, harvested him, and did everything to make him your next big MVP superstar. Just like you did with Hakeem Jeffries, just like you did with AOC, and just like you did with Kamala Harris. Obama adjusted his glasses, his voice dropping into a low, warning register that barely concealed a surge of elitist anger. Vance, to attack a public servant with such inflammatory and vile language is a desperate attempt to distract from your own party's lack of a coherent platform, he warned. The Democratic Party is a big tent that welcomes all voices, and we stand by those who dedicate their lives to the service of this country. Vance let out a sharp, jagged laugh that contained no humor, only the cold edge of a serrated blade. Service? Is that what you call it when this vile operative is still engaging in backroom deals and messaging, when he's still contacting his donors in inappropriate ways and doing whatever it takes to cling to power? He is a serial opportunist who hates America, lies, cheats, and steals at every turn. And yet he has the nerve to swivel his grotesque head at the American people with a horrific smile and say, "I'm here to help you." This is what your lab produces, Barack. Disgusting creatures who are inches away from running the largest economies in our union while they rot from the inside out. The Democrat Party isn't a political organization. It's a terrorist organization that hates America. You didn't have any idea how bad this lab experiment would turn out. Or maybe you did, and you just didn't give a rat's ass as long as they followed the narrative. Obama straightened his tie, his voice gaining a sharper, more rhythmic edge as he played his final card. Your obsession with individual flaws ignores the overwhelming reality that the heart of the public still beats for our vision of progress. The American people see through your theater and your theatrical anger. They want the soft power, the inclusivity, and the steady hand that we provide. The media, the voters, and the global community have rejected your brand of regressive, discriminatory meritocracy. We hold the moral high ground, and the public's trust remains with the party that looks like America, not the one that wants to burn it down. Vance's smile was as sharp as a razor blade and twice as cold. The heart of the public, Barack? You really think they're still buying the garbage you're reselling? You think your woke media can still protect you when the consequences of your soft approach are defecating on the sidewalks of Los Angeles? You think people haven't noticed that your compassion is just a mask for your utter incompetence? The heart of the public isn't beating for you, it's beating for common sense. And common sense is finally going viral. And if you want to talk about what the public really thinks, let's look at how your own attack machine is falling apart. Let's look at what happens when your sophisticated media drops an attack ad on a man who actually wants to save a city. I think it's time we talk about Spencer Pratt. The domino effect was accelerating, and Obama's claim of public support was the final piece of wood Vance needed for the fire. The next phase of the indictment wouldn't just be about the failures of the past, it would be about the total collapse of the Democrat media's ability to lie. You talk about the heart of the public, Barack, but you've been living in a bubble so thick you can hear the screams of the people you claim to represent, Vance declared. You think your media lackeys are still the gatekeepers of truth, but they've become nothing more than accidental advertisers for common sense. Let's talk about that attack ad your party dropped on Spencer Pratt in Los Angeles. The radical leftists actually thought they were delivering a death blow to a man who actually wants to save that city. I watched it, and I have to tell you, it was tragically, ironically, hilarious. Pure political gold. The ad says, Republican Spencer Pratt opposes using taxpayer money to build brand new houses for our unhoused neighbors. It screams, Pratt says it's time for the homeless to get help or get out. And then the kicker, Pratt thinks LA needs thousands more police officers rather than more social workers. Vance paused, his eyebrows raised in mock horror as he looked at the cameras. Do you know what the response was on Sunday, May 10th, in the year of our Lord 2026? The people didn't cower. They didn't cry about equity or systemic inequities. They said, sign me up. They said, are you kidding me? I will vote for that person in a heartbeat. This is the difference between DEI and meritocracy. When you actually get people who earn their positions, you get quality. But when you hand it to anyone because it's based on discriminatory factors like race or gender, you get the kind of garbage ad your party just produced. The mask of the great orator was finally beginning to warp into something unrecognizable. Obama's fingers were now drumming a frantic, silent beat on the mahogany table. He leaned in, his voice losing its melodic resonance as he whispered about the image of our nation. He muttered about how we are destroying the image of the United States in the eyes of the global community. Vance's voice was a low, vibrating growl now, filling every corner of the room. You want to talk about destroying things, Barack? Let's talk about what happens when a real leader decides to fix the filth you left behind in the heart of our capital. The Democrats had 3.5 years and $355 million of our tax dollars. And what did it look like? It was filth, scum, and more filth for years, because you and your DC bureaucrats didn't give a rat-ass. Meanwhile, President Trump did it for $2 million in 1 week, and he didn't use a dime of the taxpayers' money. It was all private money, including his own. Look at that reflecting pool. Now, he chose the color of the American flag blue. You cry about it, but the rest of the world is breathless at the beauty and the boldness. You want us to sit in the dark and apologize for our 250th anniversary. The Democrats can't stand to see any kind of celebration for the most glorious, historic days in the history of the world. But our framers said they wanted us to celebrate with pomp and loudness. They wanted fireworks, games, and parades. It's obvious that you just hate America. You'd rather we walk down a city block and see deranged homeless people attacking us or spitting on us. Maybe that just reflects who you are inside. But President Trump is saying, no, we are not garbage. We are the United States. We should have gold. We should have beautiful architecture. And we should have a pool that reflects the greatest nation of all time. Vance reached into his jacket and pulled out a photo of the pristine blue water reflecting the Lincoln Memorial. The sophisticated era of the parasite is over, Mr. President. The American badassery you hate so much is just another word for results. And the public is finally realizing that your dignity was just a cover for your decay. Help me make this go viral because common sense is finally catching up to you. You talk about the heart of the public, Barack, but you've been living in a bubble so thick you can't even hear the screams of the people you claim to represent. J.D. Vance took a slow, deliberate sip of water, his eyes never leaving the man who once claimed the oceans would stop rising because he spoke. The silence in the Senate chamber was no longer a void, it was a weapon, sharpened by the cold reality of a nation that was finally waking up to the sophisticated lies of the elite. You think your media lackeys are still the gatekeepers of truth, but they've become nothing more than accidental advertisers for common sense. Let's talk about your latest masterpiece of political strategy, the attack ad your party dropped on Spencer Pratt in Los Angeles. The radical leftists actually thought they were delivering a death blow to a man who wants to save that city from the filth you created. I watched it, and I have to tell you, it was tragically, ironically hilarious. It was pure political gold. The ad played like a wish list for every sane person left in California. It said, Republican Spencer Pratt opposes using taxpayer money to build brand new houses for our unhoused neighbors. It screamed, Pratt says it's time for the homeless to get help or get out. And then the kicker, delivered with such staged horror, Pratt thinks LA needs thousands more police officers rather than more social workers. Vance paused, his eyebrows raised in mock horror as he looked directly into the camera lens. Do you know what the response was on Sunday, May 10th, in the year of our Lord 2026? The people didn't cower. They didn't cry about equity or systemic inequities like you taught them to. They said, sign me up. They said, are you kidding me? I will vote for that person in a heartbeat. This is the difference between DEI and a meritocracy, Mr. President. When you actually get people who earn their positions, you get quality results. But when you hand positions to anyone just because they fit a discriminatory factor like race or gender, you get the kind of garbage your party produces. The mask of the great orator was finally beginning to warp into something unrecognizable under the fluorescent lights. Barack Obama's fingers were now drumming a frantic, silent beat on the mahogany table, a rhythmic twitch developing in his jaw. Vance, your rhetoric is designed to dehumanize the marginalized neighbors we have failed through decades of neglect, Obama protested. We believe in a world where compassion guides our policy, not the American badassery you use to incite the mob. Vance's voice dropped to a low, vibrating growl that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards of the chamber. Compassion? You call it compassion to let a city rot and defecate on itself so you can feel superior at a cocktail party? Let's talk about what happens when a real leader decides to fix the filth you left behind in the heart of our capital. The Democrats had 3.5 years and $355 million of our tax dollars to manage the reflecting pool. And what did it look like under your sophisticated watch? It was filth, scum, and more filth for years because you and your DC bureaucrats didn't give a rat's ass about this country. Meanwhile, President Trump did it for $2 million in exactly 1 week. And here is the part that really kills you. He didn't use a single dime of the taxpayers' money. It was all private money, including a massive check from his own pocket. Look at that reflecting pool. Now, he chose the color of the American flag. American flag blue. How can you even find a way to complain about the color of our own flag, Barack? You cry about it, but the rest of the world is breathless at the beauty and the boldness of a nation that finally respects itself again. You want us to sit in the dark and apologize for our existence on our 250th anniversary. The Democrats can't stand to see any kind of celebration for the most glorious, historic days in the history of the world. But our framers said they wanted us to celebrate with pomp and loudness and games and parades. It is so obvious to everyone watching that you and your party simply hate America. You would rather we walk down a city block and see deranged homeless people attacking us or spitting on us because it makes us easier to control. Maybe that filth just reflects who you are inside, repulsive, soulless, and disgusted by greatness. But President Trump is saying, no, we are not garbage. We are the United States of America. We should have gold. We should have beautiful architecture, and we should have a pool that reflects the greatest nation of all time. Vance reached into his jacket, pulled a high-gloss photo of the pristine blue water reflecting the Lincoln Memorial, and slapped it onto the table. The sophisticated era of the parasite is over, Mr. President. The American badassery you hate so much is just another word for actually getting things done. And the public is finally realizing that your dignity was just a fancy cover for your planned decay. You spent $355 million to create a swamp, and he spent $2 million to create a masterpiece. That isn't just a difference in math, it's a difference in soul. You want the UFC in front of the White House to be a scandal, but we see it as a celebration of American unity and boldness. We are reclaiming our narrative from the snakes and the Decepticons who tried to architect our ruin. Help me make this go viral, because common sense is the only thing that can kill the contagion you released. Look at this blue, Barack. It's the color of a country that is finally done with you. The air in the chamber had reached a freezing point, but J.D. Vance was just getting warmed up. He leaned back, his eyes tracking the frantic movement of Obama's fingers against the mahogany table. The silence was no longer a pause in the conversation, it was the sound of an empire of lies finally collapsing under its own weight. You speak of the image of the United States, Barack, as if it were a fragile piece of porcelain that we've somehow shattered. You talk about the global community and the prestige of our architecture with the breath of a man who hasn't stepped foot outside a gated estate in a decade. But if you want to talk about the image of this country, why don't we stop looking at your teleprompters and start looking out the window? Vance stood up slowly, his shadow stretching long and sharp across the witness table, pointing like a finger of judgment at the man in the chair. Look out that window toward the heart of our capital, toward the monuments that are supposed to reflect our soul. For 3.5 years, your party and your hand-picked bureaucrats managed that reflecting pool under the shadow of Abraham Lincoln. And what was the image you projected to the world? It was a septic tank. It was filth. It was green slime. It was scum. And it was a national embarrassment that smelled worse than the policies that allowed it to rot. You had $355 million of the taxpayers' hard-earned money allocated for urban maintenance and infrastructure in this region alone. $355 million that evaporated into the pockets of consultants, committees, and DEI coordinators. And after 3.5 years of your sophisticated management, the water was so dark you couldn't see the reflection of the man who saved the Union. Obama opened his mouth to interject, his voice a dry, grasping whisper that lacked its usual rhythmic magic. The environmental protocols and the labor regulations involved in historical preservation are, save it for the faculty lounge, Barack. Vance cut him off with the precision of a surgeon, not even turning his head to acknowledge the interruption. Let's talk about a real leader. Let's talk about what happens when a man who actually loves this country decides that good enough is an insult to the American people. President Trump walked into that mess, and he didn't call a committee. He didn't hire a DEI firm to study the intersectionality of the algae. He did it in exactly 1 week. 1 week to undo 3.5 years of your planned decay. And here is the number that is going to make every Decepticon in this city lose their mind. He didn't use $355 million. He used $2 million. $2 million, Barack. That is less than the catering budget for one of your climate summits. And even better, he didn't take a single dime from the American taxpayer to do it. It was private money. It was donations from patriots who were tired of seeing their capital look like a garbage dump. And it was a massive personal check from the man himself. He cleaned the filth. He scrubbed the rot. And then he did something that only a man with American badassery in his veins would think to do. He didn't just fill it with water. He chose a color that reflects who we are, American flag blue. Now, when the sun hits that water, it doesn't look like a swamp anymore. It looks like sovereignty. It looks like strength. It looks like a country that has stopped apologizing for its own existence. The cameras in the gallery were capturing the look of pure, unadulterated shock that was finally beginning to settle onto Obama's face. The great architect of the deep state was staring at a photograph. Vance had just slammed onto the table a vibrant, crystalline image of the reflecting pool glowing under a midday sun. You hate that blue, don't you, Mr. President? You hate it because it's a reminder that we don't need your nuance or your global architecture to be great. We just need a leader who isn't a sucker for foreign interests. And speaking of foreign interests, while you were busy flying suitcases of cash to thugs, President Trump was signing Executive Order 14392, the simple, powerful, and long overdue mandate Buy American. He shut the door on the foreign exceptions that your party has used to bleed our middle class dry for 40 years. No more waivers for foreign steel while our workers sit on the sidelines. No more rubber stamping exceptions for allies who take our money and spit on our flag. It is the end of the era where the United States was the greatest sucker on the planet. It is the return of American badassery, a term you clearly don't understand because it requires a spine and a soul. It means we win, you lose, and we don't care how many cocktail parties in Paris are offended by it. Obama sat back, his frame seeming to shrink within the confines of his perfectly tailored suit. He tried to find a rhythmic rebuttal, a way to spin the efficiency of a $2 million miracle into a threat to democracy. But the words wouldn't form. The logic was too tight. The contrast was too sharp. The blue water in that photograph was a mirror. And for the first time in his life, Barack Obama was forced to look at his own reflection and see a failure. His shadow, which once loomed over the entire world stage, now seemed to pull back toward him, hiding in the... You can sit there in your silence, Barack, but the American people are watching that water. They see a man who wastes $300 million to create a sewer, and they see a man who spends $2 million to create a masterpiece. The sophisticated era of the parasite is over. The era of the architect of ruin is dead. And as for your global community, they can keep their slime. We'll keep the blue. Vance sat back down, the silence following his words vibrating like the aftermath of a thunderclap. The hearing wasn't over, but the myth of the swamp's superiority was buried under the weight of a $2 million private fix. The Decepticons were retreating into the shadows, but the light reflecting off that blue water was chasing them all the way home. The silence in the hearing room was no longer the silence of respect for an institution. It was the silence of a system watching its final mask of hypocrisy being stripped away under the harsh glare of the truth. J.D. Vance began to pack his files, his movements slow, deliberate, and heavy with the weight of a historical verdict. The light from the high ceiling caught the sharp contrast between Barack Obama's graying composure and the iron-willed presence of the man representing the American worker. Mr. President, we have traveled a long road this afternoon, Vance declared. We've talked about the suitcases containing $1.7 billion in green cash landing in Tehran in the dead of night. We've talked about the $355 million of taxpayer money flushed into the filth of incompetence in Los Angeles, and we've seen the absolute contrast between $2 million of private patriotism and the hundreds of millions wasted by your bureaucratic rot. Vance paused, his eyes gaping into Obama, who now seemed like a shrinking shadow in his expensive suit. But this isn't just about the numbers, Barack. This is about the soul of this nation. A soul that you have tried to suffocate with your sophistication and your cowardly apologies for the last 2 decades. You thought that by darkening our history, you could make us forget who we are. You thought that by nurturing political lab experiments in your swamp, you could replace the will of the people with the control of the elite. I have a message for you, for Chuck Schumer, for Nancy Pelosi, and for every Decepticon hiding in the shadows of Washington. The era of Mr. Nice Guy is officially over. The time when we sat back and watched you sell this country out on silver platters for applause in Paris has ended. We are done being suckers for your nuanced surrender. We are done closing our eyes to the betrayal you label as global responsibility. Vance stood at his full height, his voice vibrating through the chamber with the pulse of millions of awakening Americans. We are approaching the 250th anniversary of the greatest nation in the history of mankind. And I promise you this, that celebration will not be a party of self-flagellation or apologies. It will be a display of power and pride that your kind will never understand. We will celebrate it with pomp, with fireworks, and with UFC fights right on the front lawn of the White House to honor the American warrior spirit. We will celebrate it by keeping the promise hire American and buy American. No more exceptions, no more waivers, and no more loopholes for foreign interests to bleed our workers dry. American badassery is back, and this time, it isn't backing down. Obama's lip twitched, a desperate attempt to regain his rhythmic calm, but his voice was nothing more than a hollow whisper. You are sowing division and destroying the very legacy we built to connect the world. Vance let out a cold, jagged laugh of pure contempt. Your legacy's back? Is back? Cities full of needles and suitcases of cash for people who want us dead. If that is connection, then we choose the glorious independence of a sovereign people. The fight for the soul of America doesn't end here, Mr. President. It starts with those reflecting pools of American flag blue, and it spreads to every abandoned factory in Ohio and every port in Florida. History will not judge you as a sophisticated diplomat. History will record you as the architect of ruin, defeated by the very people you called scum. Vance snapped his briefcase shut, the sound echoing like a round being chambered. He suddenly stopped and picked up a final black-bound dossier, his eyes flashing with a dangerous, unspoken intent. Today we settled the matter of the $1.7 billion for Iran. But, Mr. President, before you head back to your gated estates, how do you feel about the fact that in the next session of this hearing, I am opening the file on a new alliance? What do you have to say about the fact that Chuck Schumer just hired Eric Holder, your old wingman from the Fast and Furious scandal, into a very specific group, the so-called 2026 Election Integrity Group? Would you like to explain to the American people why a man with a history of arming cartels is now protecting our ballots? The question hung in the air like a live grenade rolling toward the witness chair. Barack Obama remained perfectly motionless, his face frozen as the words failed him for the first time in his career. J.D. Vance threw his coat over his shoulder and walked away without looking back. The sound of his footsteps on the marble floor was steady and powerful, drowning out the frantic whispers of the swamp's aides. The hearing closed in a deafening silence, the kind of silence that precedes a massive storm hitting the deep state. Outside, the afternoon sun blazed down on the crystalline water of the reflecting pool. The American flag blue was glowing, a reminder that the darkness of betrayal was finally being pushed back. America isn't sleeping anymore. The forgotten men and women are standing up, and they don't need your sophisticated explanations. They have seen the truth, and that truth is burning like an unquenchable fire. Justice is coming, and this time it isn't carrying suitcases of cash. It is carrying the final verdict of history. A great nation is coming back, bolder than ever, and it isn't apologizing for a single second of it. If you believe common sense is finally catching up to the deep state, smash that like button, subscribe to watch the establishment crumble, and drop a comment saying, "Keep the blue" if you're ready for American badassery to return.